an injury that is, somehow you are made liable for. So what we really wanted to do when we created the product was really sort of delve into the needs of the individual members and also the organisational members of Regional Arts Victoria to make sure we were capturing absolutely everything, which is why we ask a lot of questions for insurance as well. So basically, public liability insurance is essential if you are holding exhibitions, performances, if you're hosting workshops, if you're selling artworks at markets, or any sort of artistic piece at markets, if you're running studios, galleries, or even sort of temporary installation pieces as well. It covers performance artists as well as sort of visual art as well. Any activity that potentially can involve public participation is essential to have public liability insurance, just to cover off any potential liability that may fall on you from an injury, or if a product that you seem to have has created a financial loss or injury to one of your clients or customers. Basically, it's become quite easy for third parties to seek compensation, and that's why liability insurance is so important. It covers injury to what it doesn't cover is injury to yourselves or your employees. And I just want to make that abundantly clear that the policy is designed to cover third parties and attendees at your events. It is not designed to cover yourself or your employees or any sort of damage to yourself or advice that you might provide as part of your sort of instruction. It's there to cover basically property damage or personal injury to people attending your events, or that have maybe purchased a product for you that turned out to be faulty and they have had an injury. Various sort of different styles of injuries that you can sort of have, but that's the general gist of it. I suppose the biggest thing that I think is the take home from this session is how the insurance is applied and how an insurer will look at a claim. So the nature of a public liability policy is it's an occurrence-based policy. It's what that means is it's the policy that's in place at the time of the injury that's sustained or the property damage that occurred. So even if you are notified a year after the injury took place, it's the policy that was in place at the time that the event happened. Now, there are other different sort of styles of insurance that cover where the policy is that covers the claim is the one that's in place at the time you're notified of the injury or damage. But I want to make sure that you understand that this one is occurrence-based. So it's the policy that's in place at the time of the event with the injury that was incurred by your customer, client, or attendee at one of your events. So under this policy, there's a few different sort of exclusions or endorsements that we call that sort of alter the standard terms of the coverage. I suppose we'll just go straight into the nitty-gritty one. The biggest exclusion is abuse. The policy will not cover any loss related to abuse, whether that's assault, battery, verbal, physical, or sexual abuse, whether it's alleged or whether it actually happened. So this means that there's no coverage at all. It won't cover your lawyer's fees. It won't cover any compensation. It's a blanket exclusion on the policy. What it does cover, but to a lesser sort of degree, is when an artist might be using, cutting, welding, or hot works. So it won't cover any claims or injuries or property damage caused by these welding or cutting or similar sort of activity, unless it follows the relevant Australian standard. So that's sort of an important thing to do. It will cover you, but you need to make sure you're following the relevant standard that's sort of in place at the time that the work is being done. Now, I did see one of the questions that we had come through referenced participation, whether it would cover third-party or audience participation. So it does, but there is also a specification on the policy regarding participation. So it won't cover any third-party participation where there's any sort of vehicle use. So that could be, race cars or things like that. For Regional Arts Victoria members, that's probably not an issue, but just wanted to highlight that. But basically, it will provide coverage if you have third-party participation, if you are performing, in a studio and you have people from the audience sort of coming up, or if you are performing, down at Circular Quay, for instance, and you have audience participation as part of that as well. Obviously, there's certain parameters you sort of need to be mindful of. You're not getting an audience member to participate in throwing fire sticks or things of that sort of nature. But, when we created the policy, we made it very clear to the insurer the style of artists that we were looking to cover, what kind of performances would be done, and that there was very likely that there was going to be potential for third parties to participate in these things. That is fine. We probably should highlight the abuse exclusion as well, that, if you are verbal or physically abusive to, a participant, then the policy won't cover you. But if they are injured as a result of participating in your performance, then the policy sort of will respond. It will cover your defence costs and any sort of compensation that you may be liable for. So whether that's sort of medical or mental sort of anguish as well, it is all sort of claimable under the policy. Now, we know there are a wide range of events that are held by Regional Arts Victoria members. That we've tried to make sure that we're covering most of them, but if anyone wants specifics on these, whether their particular event is covered, then feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to answer any questions you have. Any events do have a cap on the amount of attendees that are allowed to attend. So the cap is 5,000 attendees. So if you are holding an event which is a multi-day event, that is not 5,000 attendees in total. It is 5,000 event attendees at any one time. So if you have a 3-day event where you're hosting a gallery sort of walk, and there's multiple sort of galleries included, and this is over 3 or 4 days, and there's 10,000 participants or people looking to attend or registered and whatnot, that's fine. That's still coverable. However, it just means that at any one time, there's a cap of 5,000 people attending the event. Now, with those events as well, there are some parameters to sort of be mindful of within the policy. Now, cancellations or non-appearances that may have an effect on hosting the event overall, none of that would be covered under this policy. That is typically covered under a specific event liability policy where you can include cancellation or non-attendance parameters, normally for an additional fee. But under this policy, it is purely a traditional public liability policy which we've created for the artist sort of community. I know at a lot of events there can be pyrotechnics. There can also be alcohol served, inflatables served as well. Now, pyrotechnics is an exclusion under the policy. We have been successful in having the insurer agree to to cover the vicarious liability. So that's any liability that the event organizer that's insured under the policy might have associated to them specifically, not the total liability if there's an injury to someone, but what the event organizer under this policy is specifically found liable for. And we have had success in getting that covered, but we need to understand whether there are a registered, compliant, insured third-party individual that is creating the pyrotechnics, that is setting things like that off, and administering all of that, everything to sort of do with it. So, and all the sort of steps and safeguards are sort of in place. So it's not a blanket no. It's we can potentially provide this coverage. Another one is inflatables. Now that hasn't come up yet, but I think given what we have sort of seen in the media, this can come with its own set of issues. So anyone that may have inflatables at an event that they are hosting or creating, please reach out to us and we can have a look and see if we can work it into the coverage or specifically to yourself. So yeah, in a nutshell, there are specifications within the policy of things that we won't cover. Every insurer will have their own list of things that they can't do, and that they are just a blanket no one. But in the event endorsement that we have created, we do have the option to create what we call a write back in the coverage, and the insurer can take a look at potentially including it as well. Another exclusion that is on the policy is around infectious diseases. Now, this doesn't really have too much of a bearing these days, but this endorsement was applied by just about every insurer, whether it was relevant really or not, when we had COVID and that whole thing hit. So every insurer put on a version of this endorsement or exclusion, and it's just saying they will not cover any loss or damage or any costs associated with an infectious disease, whether that's declared by the government, World Health Organization, directly related to COVID-19 or any sort of variants or any really infectious disease kind of thing. I've never actually seen it enforced. So I don't think it's a key exclusion per se, but it is something to be mindful of, because we never know when we're going to have another sort of outbreak. You sort of hear about it every day, that there are potential for these things to happen. So I suppose I might move on to just some of the questions that were pre-submitted. Sorry if it looks like I'm reading, I kind of am. It says, yes, sorry. So is public liability essential for a director employed by a theatre company, or will they be covered by the theatre company's insurance? Now, this would be dependent on the contract that you have in place. You would need to check that with your employer or the theatre company. Most policies will cover the company, and it will also cover all employees. Now, employees do not mean necessarily contractors, so the theatre would need to double check that. Your policy, if you held your own policy, would cover you, but it wouldn't. I couldn't say it with 100% certainty whether you'd be covered by the theatre director's insurance, because it would depend on the style of contract of employment that you have with them. So, I mean, if anyone needed assistance on that, I'm happy to take a look, but would also need visibility over the theatre company's policy to fully answer that question. We had a question about, what type of insurance do you need if you're doing a one-time busking gig? Obviously, that's sort of dependent on where it's being done, what is being done. As well, in a nutshell, you probably need public liability, which is exactly what this policy is there to cover you for. If you are performing on the street or in event center or something, and you have someone trip over your guitar case, for instance, that is on the floor, and you're asking for sort of donations, then the policy is there to respond to if that person wants to make a claim for their injury under it. So you definitely need a public liability policy. Probably want to look into a property policy for yourself as well, just for your belongings, in case, someone decided to come up and vandalize your equipment or steal your acoustic equipment, for instance. Our policies are not going to provide coverage for that, so you would probably want to look and take a property damage policy elsewhere. And I suppose you likely need insurance, so you need permits of sorts, but that's kind of outside the scope of insurance, so I can't really advise on that. What limit is provided in your public liability? Yeah, so we have a $20 million limit. Now, something to be mindful of with this is it's $20 million for everyone. So it's a shared limit across every member of Regional Arts Victoria, whether you're an individual member or an organisational member. So what that means is if one person had a $5 million claim on the policy, there is $15 million left for the remainder of the members for that current policy period. If someone had a $10 million claim, obviously there would be $10 million left for people to make a claim. Now, I don't think that's ever going to be a problem so far. Luckily, we haven't had any claims out of Regional Arts members under the public liability, which is nice. It means we can continue to keep pricing down. But it is something to be mindful of, that it is a shared limit. So if you happen to have a question, and know a lot of councils ask for copies of your public liability certificate of currency, and they want to know that you have a $20 million limit on there, you can comfortably provide them. They don't really need to know that it's a shared limit. I think they're quite across the nature of these policies, and that sort of comes around a lot. So yes, we have a $20 million limit for the for the public liability, and $20 million for the product liability as well. What equipment, if any, is covered by the insurance policy? Now, this is a great question because it comes up quite often. There is no coverage for your equipment, unless your equipment has caused a personal injury to one of your customers, to a participant in an event, someone attending an event, or has damaged their property. Now, public liability is to cover third parties. It's covering you as an individual for claims made against you from third parties and any personal injury or property damage from them. It's not designed to cover personal injury to yourself, property damage of your own. So it's a very different policy that you would sort of need to look into. Now, Regional Arts Victoria and us are at the moment looking into other options for other insurance policies, one of them being property coverage. Now, that can be whether that's property in transit, if you, say, have an artwork that you're moving from the exhibition centre to another, or whether you're going to sort of put it in storage, or whether you're going to be performing, out in public, then we are looking to potentially include that coverage in the future. Obviously, if that's something that you guys need, reach out to any of us, and we can sort of keep track and sort of work out the needs of members, because we obviously want to make sure that the insurance policies that we're sort of providing are exactly what members need and want as well. I know there's a couple of questions coming in, so I've just got a couple more that were sort of pre-submitted, and then I'll pivot over to those ones. Right, so this one again is about artwork in possession of a gallery where it's being displayed. A lot of galleries won't accept responsibility for loss or damage. it's built into their policy. It should be built into their policy that it will cover you. So what these, in this instance, what they're likely trying to do is remove any liability from themselves and any need for them to claim on their insurance. What your policy with Regional Arts Victoria, the public liability, it will cover damage to belongings that belong to third parties while in your possession. So if you are hosting an exhibition and you have 10 artworks that are on the walls, one of them sort of falls off because you've had faulty nails in the wall or a faulty display case, and that falls off, and their equipment or their property is damaged, then this policy will pick up that damage. It's not going to pick up your own though. And so what you need to make sure when you do have disclaimers in contracts where you're, putting artwork on other walls of other exhibition centres or galleries, is make sure that they have that coverage in place. And I would probably challenge them on that, because in every contract you're looking to see how much liability you can pass on to the other person. But that coverage should be automatically included in their insurance policy. It's called, and Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, care, custody and control, I believe, or a version of that in every policy. It's normally a reduced sublimit. So we have obviously the $20 million overall limit, and then there'll be reduced sublimits for certain subsections within the policy, that being one of them. So it's normally sitting around 250,000. There is another one. So we covered public participation and third-party participation, but just to recap on this, if you do have people participating in installations that you have put up, or if you're sort of performing on the street or in a centre that where you welcome third parties into your performance, then that is fine to be covered under the policy. Obviously, make sure that you're not putting them in any danger, but that is a covered element of the policy. Another one that was asked was workshops with children. Now, workshops, whether with adults or children, are claimable and covered under the policy. What we should probably point out is the abuse exclusion as well. Now, there is no coverage for any allegations of abuse, whether to children or to an adult. So that's probably an important thing to be mindful of. We do still help regional arts members with contractual needs for abuse coverage, and we do have an insurer that can provide that cover. The cost is a little higher than your sort of standard policy because of the risk that the insurer is taking on in covering that, because when a claim arises out of sort of abuse, then it's going to be a very large claim, a lot of defence costs, a lot of compensation costs that will come out of it. So children's workshops are fine, but just be mindful that there is that sort of exclusion in place on it that is probably very relevant to anything where there's working with children. Should also make sure that you have working with children checks and all that sort of thing in place. It's not necessarily something that all insurers will ask to cite prior to approving coverage, but it's something that may arise in the event of a claim.
Simone, in the chat is a question about operating a scissor lift for installing art. So imagining that's it could be indoor or outdoor, but imagining it might be outdoor public art.
Yeah, I might get Patrick to help me out with this one. But we do have a sort of working with heights provision in the policy, and it's anything over 3 meters where there's property damage or injury to people, then it's sort of excluded. My assumption would be that it covers, if the scissor lift that you're using to say put up artwork or something along the lines of that if it's, sitting at 1.5 meters or 2 meters or even 2.5 meters, and, you drop something on it, it hurts someone, or someone, walks into, or you back it into someone, then you can claim it under the policy for any compensation or any sort of cost associated with that. When it's sort of sitting over that 3 metre threshold, that's when the claim is likely to be declined. But that is something that we're looking to increase. So that's a future thing. Patrick, do you have any other tidbits to include on that one?
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, although the policy and the business description does note exhibition installations, it's kind of a particular grey area because we're not sure if the insurer is like kind of aware to the extent of how you're installing the yard, etc. So just in terms of that one, if you're operating kind of machinery, I would just suggest as a sort of generally as a cautionary thing to just inform the insurer, just to ensure that it is covered. We wouldn't want a case where you go ahead and install the yard and then the insurer comes back and says, oh, we're not actually covering that. It's not actually covered under policy. So just in terms of that, if there is kind of operating of machinery, we just suggest kind of notifying us or just letting the insurer know first.
Yeah, so we've sort of done our best to try and paint the full picture to the insurers about exactly what you need and how things are going to be done. Another one that seems to have come up in the past is rigging and whether installation of rigging is included under the policy. Now, we obviously know that we're going to need, things that get to a certain height to install those setups. So they are aware of it, but I think Patrick is absolutely correct in saying that if you are using these things on a sort of frequent basis, then it's probably best to just reach out to us and ask us to just double confirm it with the insurer. At least that way you've got it in writing from us, we've got it in writing from them, and there's no grey area left. It's all very clear and outlined in what they're doing. Now, there's one question that came up that I thought was very interesting. And what is the artist's liability for a public sculpture after you've handed it over to the commissioning body? How long afterwards does the artist need to maintain public liability insurance? And does this change if the artist ceases to practice? So this is kind of a long-winded answer, but I'll try and summarize it. Once the sculpture is handed over and accepted by the commissioning body, whether that's an authority, a museum, an individual client, the ownership and the responsibility for this would typically transfer to that body. Legal and financial liability can still attach to the artist in certain circumstances, but this depends on a few different things. One, your contractual responsibilities that you have with the person who has commissioned the artwork. If it says, you must maintain public liability, you are responsible for this, any provisions like that, we don't necessarily want to see in a contract. We want you to try and push back on, send it to us. We will highlight portions that we don't find fair, because these are oftentimes unfair contractual rights. So anything that you're sort of unsure of when they have said, you need to maintain public liability, even while the artwork is not in your possession, you're not in control of it in any way, shape or form, they're trying to spare their own liability. So what we need to do, what we'd like you to do, I suppose, is one, be mindful of those contractual clauses and read through contracts with a fine-tooth comb before you sign anything. There's too many times where I've seen people get stuck and they have assumed all liability when it wasn't rightfully done. So be mindful of that. Check your contractual responsibilities and what you need to sort of have in there. And if you're unsure, we're happy to take a look. We're not lawyers, we're insurance brokers, but we do see these quite regularly. So I'm happy to review insurance clauses within those. Can't review the whole contract because it's outside of my scope of knowledge. We're happy to look at the insurance clauses and anything that stands out to you that might not quite be right or clear. As I said, the liability should switch over to the commissioning body, but where it still sort of can impact on you and where you should still have public liability to it for a little while, is if there is a defect or faulty workmanship found. So if it's found that you have been negligent because a defect has been located due to use of poor materials, or if there's a design flaw, then that's something that can still fall back on you. So it is an idea to have public liability, at least for the duration of the installation, and maybe for a year or so afterwards. Now, the statutory requirement for insurance and for making a claim against a person, sorry, not for insurance, the statutory requirement for making a claim against a person is 7 years. So that's the statute of limitations in Australia. That's not to say you need to have policies in place for 7 years after you pass on the artworks. It's just something to be mindful of. As I mentioned earlier, these policies are occurrence-based. So they are it's the policy that's in place at the time in this instance, defect or faulty workmanship was located, and located because that had injured somebody, or caused property damage to another person. Now, it's as soon as they are notified of that, it's the policy that's in place when that happened, not the policy that's in place 5 years from now. So you'd always go back to the policy that was in place at the time of the event. So that's something to be mindful of as well. But in most cases, the liability will hand over to the commissioning person or body, or whoever has sort of requested this, at the time of handover. All sort of responsibility would more or less be rescinded from you, but there is that sort of thing to be mindful of with any sort of defect type of thing. And also check your contracts. Make sure there's no assumed liability clauses, any hold harmless clauses. I know that is a question we get quite regularly because it's in our insurance questionnaire. But what it's basically saying is, are you holding anybody, are you taking on all responsibility in the event of a claim that's arisen from your service? If you have a contract with someone, this is a very common contractual clause that we will find, and it's always basically passing the buck to one person, one member of that contract, and the other person basically will get off scot-free from this, and that's not what we want to see. We always want to make sure we're telling our clients or our customers to push back on those clauses. So that's, if we're taking one thing out of today, it's read your contracts, check the clauses, and if you need any extra help with it, let us know, and we're happy to sort of take a look at some of those things. One last one on here, but I think we're sort of coming to the end, so maybe I'll do this really quickly. But a question on independent contractors. If you bring in an independent contractor, they're not covered under this policy. They'll cover a direct contractor, but not an independent or a subcontractor, if that makes sense. So I'm happy to provide a lot more information about this, and we can sort of take these sort of questions offline. But basically, independent contractors aren't covered under this policy and are generally excluded under most policies. The contractors should hold their own insurance. And that's basically what it's trying to say. Do we have any specific questions in the chat?
There's a couple here, Simone, about public artworks, and they're kind of specific from Glenn, and it's about covering the actual artwork. So not so much in talking about our policy, but he said artwork 1 is a kinetic artwork, classed as playground equipment.
Okay.
And it's built to Australian standards, and it will get certified as at the Australian standard. And then artwork 2 is sculptures, and then they set them on fire as a performance. We have a detailed risk assessment and safety documentation and process. And Glenn, if you're there, you can just pop your microphone on. Maybe you are talking about covering the actual artworks, or are you talking
No.
about covering the public liability?
Covering the public liability.
Oh, yep.
So
Okay.
if a child falls off
Okay.
and hurts
Yep.
themselves.
Okay, you are talking about the public. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. So not coverage for the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can fix the work. That's fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're burning it anyway.
Oh no, it's two separate scenarios. One's a steel kinetic mixed media.
Yep.
So it's a completely different scenario, Australian standards, and then the other one is fire performance in a public place.
Yeah, the first one, artwork one, the kinetic artwork, that's fine. Coverage would auto include under the public liability for that. So any injuries that were sustained by people using it, that's not an issue. That's fine. The sculptures and the setting them on fire is where we probably need to delve deeper into. I'm not 100% sure that this insurer will approve that, but you obviously have said you have a detailed risk assessment, you've got documentation and processes there. As if we can prove to the insurer that you have covered all bases to limit injury and to try and stop any sort of damage occurring to a person or their property, then we can put forward an argument to the insurer to try and get that covered for you. It would be as a one-off to yourself, and it wouldn't sort of be a blanket acceptance to everyone, because it's obviously taken on a case-by-case basis. So I'm happy to look into that for you on that one. The first one, as I said, is perfectly fine. It's built to standards, certified, and yep.
In context to negotiations with insurer, what would be valuable for me is what they need. So they may say, look, we need an actual specific qualification, or we may need specific paperwork, or X, Y, Z, because our standards are pretty high, but then they may be looking for something specific. And that means that I can then work out how to invest in actually getting that qualification, or how to invest to get that paperwork, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I'm happy to take this one off and sort of give you in detail more, but in a nutshell, they'll want to know exactly what it is, what you're doing to it, when you're doing it, how many people are going to be there when it happens, what safety protocols you've got in place, what any sort of qualifications that you might have, and how it's been done. But that would very likely be the main questions that they ask. They really, any information we can provide them on how you've tried to mitigate any potential loss is beneficial.
Yep.
So any processes you have documented and safety procedures would go a long way with the insurer. But yeah, I'm happy to take that one off, and I can send you a full list of things.
Thank you very much.
That's okay. Which ones did you want me to go into next? Do you guys have a list of the ones that you want? Wait, what? Oh, what's going on? Oh, I'm back. No, did I leave?
Hey, you're on mute.
Oh, am I on mute?
No,
Oh,
Kate
sorry.
is.
I was on mute.
Oh.
Sorry. There is a question there about just the policy as a monthly or yearly policy, and the cost. So the cost is on RAV's website. I might just put a little link to our membership page in the chat for anyone that is not currently a member or part of the policy. So to join as a member of RAV, it's $62, and to join with this policy that we're talking about today, which is the combined liability insurance, it's $268, and it's an annual membership, and the policy starts in October. If you join at any other time during the year, there's a pro rata rate for joining, so you pay less in any of the other months, and the policy does renew all together as a group in October.
I think, sorry, I know we've got only just a couple of minutes. I just want to touch on one final point, not in relation to public liability. If anyone has any other questions on that, send them through to myself or Regional Arts Victoria staff, and I'll sort of answer them all for you. But the other thing I wanted to just mention really quickly was professional indemnity insurance, and the need for that, because I know we've sort of talked a bit about contracts and insurance clauses in that. Oftentimes we will see contractual clauses that require you to have professional indemnity. So it's there to cover any negligence related to the services or advice that you provide. So that could be art educators if you're hosting workshops, facilitating those, if you're curating, consulting, designing, people sort of aren't happy with the service that you have provided, not sort of a vexatious claim against you, but if there has been something that you have fallen short on, and it's created a financial loss, that will a professional indemnity policy will generally pick up claims like that. Now we can provide a lot more information on that, and as I said, it's not a policy that is currently in place, but it's something that we are looking at with Regional Arts Victoria, as well as the property damage or property policy as well. So if anyone needs it, please let us know and we can work faster.
Thanks, Simone. I think we'll wrap it up there now. Do you have your wrap-up speech?
Not really, just
Ready?
to everyone for coming, and Simone and Patrick for hosting. And I think if there's additional questions, if you want to send them through to us at membership@rav.net.au, and we can put you on to GSA. And there's also great resources on our website.
There's a couple of links been in the chat just to the information that we have for insurance on the website. So feel free to check that out. But there's a couple of specific questions I can see in there. And yeah, as Nell said, send them through. Thanks so much for joining, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.